The mining colony on Kepler 442b had been dead for 3 standard days when ZYXTRA found the small human. The Veltar salvage captain moved through the wreckage of New Shanghai with practiced efficiency, her 4 arms working independently as she cataloged valuable materials. Her species had evolved from pack hunters on a world where cooperation meant survival, and, even alone, she moved with the fluid grace of a predator. The human settlement showed signs of a pirate raid. Buildings burned, equipment scattered, bodies left where they fell. ZYXTRA had seen dozens of these scenes across the Outer Rim. Humans were notorious for pushing into dangerous territory, establishing colonies on worlds that more sensible species avoided. Pirates knew this, and human settlements made tempting targets. The species was young, barely 3 centuries into space travel, and their government couldn't protect every far-flung outpost. She was examining a damaged mining laser when she heard it, a soft whimpering from beneath a collapsed storage unit. ZYXTRA's sensitive ears twitched, triangulating the sound. After a moment's hesitation, she began moving debris with her lower arms while her upper hands kept her plasma rifle ready. The storage unit was heavy, designed to protect valuable ore samples from the planet's frequent seismic activity. It had probably saved the child's life when the pirates struck. ZYXTRA had to use her suit's mechanical assists to lift the twisted metal. Underneath, huddled in a space barely large enough for his small frame, was a human juvenile. The boy couldn't have been more than 6 standard years old. His dark hair was matted with dust, and his clothes, a simple jumpsuit in the colony's blue and white colors, were torn and dirty. When he saw ZYXTRA's alien form, his eyes went wide with terror. "Easy, little one," she said softly, switching to the basic human English that most spacers learned. Her translation implant helped smooth the words, though her natural voice was deeper and more resonant than human vocal cords could produce. "I'm not going to hurt you." The child pressed himself against the far wall of his hiding space, shaking. ZYXTRA could smell his fear, sharp and acrid, mixed with the lingering scent of smoke and death that permeated the colony. She'd encountered human children before, but always in safer circumstances. This one had probably watched his entire world die. "What's your name?" she asked, keeping her voice gentle. She holstered her rifle and showed her hands, palms up, a gesture of peace that most species understood. The boy's lips moved, but no sound came out. He tried again. "Tommy," he whispered. "Hello, Tommy. I am ZYXTRA. I'm here to help." She could see the calculation in his young eyes, the terrible wisdom that came from surviving trauma. He was weighing whether to trust her or remain hidden. But hunger and thirst were powerful motivators, and he'd been trapped for days. "Are there more bad people coming?" Tommy asked. "No," ZYXTRA said firmly. "The bad people are gone. But we need to get you out of here. This place isn't safe." Slowly, carefully, Tommy crawled out of his hiding spot. He was smaller than ZYXTRA had expected, even accounting for human children's diminutive size. Malnutrition, probably. The Outer Rim colonies often struggled with food supplies. "Where is everyone?" Tommy asked, looking around at the devastation with the heartbreaking acceptance of a child who had already seen too much. ZYXTRA felt something twist in her chest. Her people valued honesty, even with their young, but humans seemed more fragile in some ways. "They're gone, little one." "I'm sorry." Tommy nodded as if he'd already known. "Mama said if something bad happened, I should hide until the good people came." "Are you good people?" The question hit harder than ZYXTRA expected. In Veltar culture, moral categories were more fluid. Survival came first, and honor was defined by loyalty to one's pack. But looking at this small human, she found herself wanting to be worthy of his trust. "I try to be," she said. Tommy seemed to accept this answer. He walked over to a partially collapsed wall and pulled out a small backpack stuffed with what looked like clothes and a few toys. "I packed this when the shooting started," he said matter-of-factly. "Mama taught me the emergency rules." ZYXTRA felt a pang of respect for Tommy's mother, whoever she had been. The woman had prepared her child well for a dangerous universe. "That was very smart," ZYXTRA said. "Are you hurt? Are you hungry?" Tommy nodded to the second question. ZYXTRA pulled out an emergency ration from her kit. Not ideal for human physiology, but the basic nutrients would keep him alive. She activated the heating element and handed it to him. While Tommy ate with the desperate efficiency of the truly hungry, ZYXTRA considered her options. Her salvage ship, the Wandering Moon, was a 2-day journey back to the nearest inhabited system. She could drop the boy off at a human world, but the Outer Rim was lawless territory. Who knew what kind of life waited for an orphan child there? More importantly, taking care of human young was far outside her expertise. Veltar children were born more developed, capable of basic communication and self-care within days of hatching. Human infants were notoriously helpless, requiring years of intensive care. Even at Tommy's age, he would need constant supervision, proper nutrition, education, socialization with his own kind. But, as she watched him carefully portion out his food, making it last despite his obvious hunger, she felt an unexpected stirring of what her people called kathek, the protective instinct that bound pack members together. It was illogical. Tommy wasn't her species, wasn't even her responsibility. She was a salvage operator, not a caregiver. Where will I go now? Tommy asked between bites. The question was posed with such simple trust that ZYXTHRA felt another twist in her chest. He was looking at her, as if she had all the answers, as if she could somehow make his shattered world whole again. There are human worlds, she said carefully. Places where people will take care of you. Tommy considered this, his young face serious. Will you take me there? Yes, ZYXTHRA heard herself say. I'll take you somewhere safe. She spent the rest of the day making Tommy as comfortable as possible while she completed her salvage assessment. The colony's equipment was mostly worthless now, damaged beyond repair or contaminated by the fires. But there were some valuable rare earth elements in the mining operation's final shipment that the pirates had missed. More importantly, she found the colony's data core damaged but potentially recoverable. It would contain records of what happened here, possibly including information about Tommy's family. The data might be worth something to the human authorities, though getting their attention in the Outer Rim was always challenging. As night fell on the alien world, ZYXTHRA set up a temporary shelter in the colony's least damaged building. Tommy had grown more talkative as the day progressed, sharing fragments of his life before the attack. His mother had been the colony's chief botanist, working on adapting earth crops to the local soil. His father had died in a mining accident 2 years earlier. Mama said, Daddy went to the place where the stars touch, Tommy told her as they shared another ration. She said someday we'd see him again, but not for a long time. ZYXTHRA didn't know how to respond to human concepts of afterlife and reunion. Her people believed consciousness simply ended at death. There was no continuation, no reunion, only the memory held by those who survived. But she could see the comfort these beliefs gave Tommy, and she didn't want to take that away from him. Your mama sounds like she was very smart, ZYXTHRA said instead. She was the smartest person on the whole planet, Tommy agreed with the absolute certainty of a child's love. She knew about everything, plants and stars and how to make the food machines work when they broke. That night, as Tommy slept curled up in her spare blanket, ZYXTHRA found herself studying his small form. Human children seemed impossibly vulnerable. No natural weapons, no armor, barely capable of surviving without constant care. How had such a fragile species spread across dozens of worlds in such a short time? But then, she remembered the stories she'd heard in spacer bars. Humans pushing into systems that other species avoided, building settlements on worlds ravaged by storms or radiation or predators. They seemed driven by something beyond mere survival. Some inexplicable need to expand, to explore, to claim new territories regardless of the cost. Looking at Tommy, she began to understand. Each human carried within them the potential for that same driving force. This small boy might grow up to be a scientist like his mother, pushing the boundaries of knowledge, or an explorer, mapping new systems, or simply a person who refused to give up when others would surrender. The thought filled her with an unexpected emotion, something like hope mixed with anticipation. What would this small human become? The next morning brought disturbing news. ZYXTHRA's ship's sensors detected multiple vessels entering the system. Not human ships, but Scarvan raiders. The same species that had probably hit the colony originally, returning to strip whatever they'd missed. We need to leave, she told Tommy as she packed their gear. Now! The boy didn't ask questions, simply shouldered his little backpack, and followed her toward the landing site where the Wandering Moon waited. But they were too late. The raiders had already spotted her ship, and were moving to intercept. ZYXTHRA's mind raced through possibilities. Her salvage ship wasn't built for combat. and with Tommy aboard, running wasn't really an option. If they were caught, the raiders would have no mercy for either of them. She could try to hide, but the Scarven had good sensors, and there wasn't much cover on this barren world. ZYXRA, Tommy said quietly, tugging at her arm. I know a place. He led her away from the colony ruins toward a series of rocky outcroppings she'd barely noticed during her survey. Hidden among the stones was the entrance to what looked like a natural cave system. But when they got closer, she could see it had been modified, supports added, the entrance camouflaged. Mama showed me this, Tommy explained. She said it was our special secret place for emergencies. The caves were extensive, running deep into the planet's crust. Tommy's mother had clearly spent considerable time preparing them. There were supplies cached throughout the tunnels, along with basic life support equipment, and even a small communication array. She was planning for this, ZYXRA realized. She knew the colony might be attacked. Tommy nodded. Mama said humans made enemies by going too far too fast. She said we always had to be ready. They settled in to wait out the raiders, and ZYXRA began to understand something new about humanity. They weren't just recklessly brave, they were prepared. They pushed into dangerous territory, yes, but they also planned for failure. They accepted the risks and made contingencies. Over the next several hours, as they hid in the depths of the planet, Tommy told her more about his life, about how his mother had taught him to identify edible plants and dangerous animals, about the emergency protocols every colonist learned, about the hidden supply caches scattered around the settlement. Mama said humans were like seeds, Tommy said as they shared water from one of the cave's storage tanks. She said we went to lots of different places, even dangerous ones, because that's how you make sure some of them grow. The metaphor resonated with ZYXRA in ways she hadn't expected. Her own people were more cautious, more focused on consolidating their territory rather than expanding it. But there was something admirable about humanity's approach, this willingness to risk everything for the possibility of growth. When the raiders finally left the system, ZYXRA and Tommy emerged from the caves to find her ship untouched. The Scarven had apparently dismissed it as worthless salvage, not worth the effort of boarding. As they lifted off from Kepler 442b, Tommy pressed against the viewport, watching his world shrink below them. Will I ever come back? He asked. ZYXRA considered the question. Maybe, she said. Humans have a way of returning to places they've been, even dangerous ones. Good, Tommy said with quiet determination. Mama's still down there. I want to visit her grave someday. As they entered hyperspace and the stars stretched into lines of light, ZYXRA found herself making a decision that would change both their lives. She wasn't going to drop Tommy off at the nearest human world. She was going to find him a real home, somewhere he could grow and learn and become whatever kind of human he was meant to be. She owed him that much. After all, he had already saved her life once, just by trusting her enough to share his mother's secret sanctuary. The wandering moon jumped to hyperspace, carrying an unlikely pair toward an uncertain future, but one that suddenly seemed full of possibility. The Veltar homeworld of Keth Moran was nothing like Tommy had expected. From the observation deck of the orbital station, he watched the planet rotate below them, swirling clouds of amber and gold over continents that looked like they were carved from precious metals. 3 moons hung in the sky like jewels, their surfaces covered in the sprawling cities of Exthara's people. It's beautiful, Tommy said, his face pressed against the transparent aluminum viewport. In the 6 months since leaving Kepler 442b, he had grown taller and stronger. Good food and regular sleep had filled out his thin frame, and his eyes had lost some of their haunted quality. ZYXRA felt a familiar warmth at his wonder. Bringing a human child to the Veltar homeworld had required extensive negotiations with planetary authorities, multiple health screenings, and more paperwork than a standard trade agreement. But Tommy's presence had already changed her life in ways she couldn't have imagined. Wait until you see the singing canyons, she said, her 4 arms working at the navigation console. The wind makes music there that can be heard from orbit. Over the past months, as they had traveled from system to system, while ZYXRA completed salvage contracts, Tommy had proven to be remarkably adaptable. He learned basic Veltar words with startling speed, mastered the ship's entertainment systems, and even helped with simple maintenance tasks. His natural curiosity about everything around him had reminded ZYXRA why she had chosen a life among the stars in the first place. More importantly, he had begun to heal. The nightmares still came sometimes, but less frequently. He spoke about his parents without the crushing sadness that had marked his first weeks aboard the Wandering Moon. And he had started making plans, talking about what he wanted to learn, where he wanted to go, what kind of person he wanted to become. "Will your family like me?" Tommy asked as they prepared to descend to the planet's surface. ZYXTRA felt a flutter of nervousness. Veltar society was built around extended family groups called Katherin, which could include hundreds of individuals across multiple generations. Her own Katherin was smaller than most. Her parents were respected scholars, her siblings successful in their various fields, but they were still traditionalists in many ways. Bringing an alien child into the family group was unprecedented. "They'll love you," she said with more confidence than she felt. How could they not? The descent to Keth Moran's surface took them through layers of cloud that sparkled with microscopic crystals, a natural phenomenon that turned the planet's sunsets into displays of living art. Tommy watched it all with wide eyes, asking questions about atmospheric composition and geological formations that impressed even the Veltar traffic controllers. ZYXTRA's family compound was located in the foothills outside the capital city, a collection of graceful spires connected by bridges that seemed to grow naturally from the landscape. As their transport approached the landing pad, Tommy could see dozens of Veltar emerging from the buildings, adults and children, elders and young adults, all coming to see the human child their Kothek had brought home. "Remember what I taught you about greetings," ZYXTRA said as they disembarked. Tommy nodded seriously and stepped forward. In carefully practiced Veltar, he said, "I am Tommy Rodriguez, child of Dr. Elena Chun and Marcus Rodriguez. I seek the protection and wisdom of this Katherin, and I offer my loyalty and service in return." The formal words, spoken in a high, clear human voice, brought absolute silence to the gathering. Then, ZYXTRA's mother, the matriarch Velsereth, stepped forward. She was tall even by Veltar standards, her silver-tinged scales marking her as an elder, her forearms moving in the complex gestures of welcome. "I am Velsereth, mother of mothers, keeper of the ancient ways. You are welcome here, Tommy Chin Rodriguez, child of distant stars. Your courage honors your parents' memory, and your loyalty honors my daughter who chose to protect you." The ceremonial acceptance was followed by chaos as the entire family surrounded them. Tommy found himself passed from adult to adult, examined by curious children, questioned by elderly scholars who had never seen a human up close. Through it all, he maintained the polite composure that ZYXTRA had taught him, though she could see the overwhelming nature of it all in his slightly glazed expression. ZYXTRA's youngest sister, Kilnara, rescued him by offering to show him to his room. As they walked through the compound's winding corridors, she peppered him with questions about human physiology, culture, and psychology. Kilnara was training to be a xenobiologist, and Tommy's presence was like having a living research subject in the family. "Do all humans learn languages as quickly as you do?" she asked in accented but clear English. "The speed of your acquisition is remarkable." "I don't know," Tommy said honestly. "I never met other human kids my age. Mama said I was good at learning things, but maybe all kids are." This casual revelation stopped Kilnara in her tracks. "You've never met other humans your age? Ever?" Tommy shook his head. The colony was mostly grown-ups. There were a few other kids, but they were all older. And after, he trailed off, the familiar shadow crossing his face. Kilnara's expression softened with understanding. "Well, you'll meet human children soon enough. ZYXTRA has been working on something special for you." That evening, as 3 moons rose over the Veltar homeworld, the family gathered in the great hall for the evening meal. Tommy sat beside ZYXTRA, still somewhat overwhelmed by the number of people around him, but growing more comfortable as the night progressed. The food was carefully prepared to accommodate his human digestive system, and he found most of it surprisingly tasty. But the real surprise came when Velsereth stood to make an announcement. "Our Katherin has been blessed by the arrival of young Tommy," she said, her formal voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "But we have also learned something important about ourselves. For too long, we have focused inward, concerned only with our own people and our own worlds. This human child has reminded us that the galaxy is vast, and that sometimes the greatest honor comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves." She gestured to ZYXTRA, who rose with obvious nervousness. My daughter has requested permission to establish a new branch of our family's activities. She wishes to create a sanctuary for orphaned children of all species, a place where young ones who have lost their families can find safety, education, and new purpose. The hall erupted in discussion as family members debated the proposal. Tommy listened with growing amazement as he realized they were talking about creating something like a school or orphanage, but for alien children from across the galaxy. The idea was ambitious beyond anything he had imagined. The Confederacy has been looking for neutral parties to manage such facilities, HFY said when the discussion died down. There are too many wars, too many raids, too many children left behind. Someone needs to care for them. An elderly male named Thekmoran raised a concern. The expense would be enormous. And the risk, we would be taking in children from species that might be hostile to each other or to us. The human government has already expressed interest in funding such a project, Velserith said smoothly. It seems Tommy's rescue has drawn their attention. They're prepared to offer substantial support for a pilot program. Tommy felt a thrill of excitement. You mean there might be other kids like me? Other kids who lost their families. HFY placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. If we do this, yes. Children from many different worlds, all looking for a safe place to grow up. The vote, when it came, was unanimous in favor. The Catharan would support HFY's proposal, and they would begin construction of the sanctuary immediately. Tommy would be their first resident, helping to design the facilities and establish the programs that would serve other orphan children. Over the following weeks, Tommy threw himself into the project with the enthusiasm that seemed to be uniquely human. He worked with Veltar architects to design living spaces that could accommodate different atmospheric requirements and gravity preferences. He helped xenobiologists plan dietary programs for various species. He even worked with the family's youngest members to create games and activities that could bring together children from different worlds. But his most important contribution came during a planning meeting with potential funding organizations. Representatives from a dozen different species had gathered to discuss the sanctuary project, and many were skeptical about its feasibility. Young species like the humans are idealistic, said Ambassador Vorth of the Hegemony Worlds. But practical considerations must be addressed. How do you integrate species with conflicting biology? How do you handle territorial instincts? How do you prevent the formation of hostile factions? Tommy, who had been sitting quietly beside HFY throughout the meeting, suddenly stood up. May I say something? The alien representatives turned to look at him with expressions ranging from amusement to curiosity. To them, he was little more than a curiosity, a human child being used to add emotional weight to the proposal. I never met kids from other planets before I came here, Tommy said, his young voice clear and confident. But I learned that Veltar kids are just like human kids in lots of ways. They want to play games and learn new things and have friends. They get scared sometimes, and they miss their families when they're gone. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each representative. I think if you put kids together who all lost their families, they'll understand each other. Maybe they'll look different or eat different food or breathe different air, but they'll know what it feels like to be alone and scared. And they'll want to help each other not be alone anymore. The simplicity of his words carried more weight than hours of technical presentations. Ambassador Vorth leaned back in his chair, his scaled features thoughtful. And you believe this commonality would overcome biological and cultural differences? I think kids are smarter about some things than grown-ups are, Tommy said seriously. Grown-ups worry about all the differences. Kids just want to not be sad and lonely. The meeting's tone shifted dramatically after Tommy's impromptu speech. Questions became more practical, focused on implementation rather than feasibility. By the end of the session, funding commitments had been secured from 6 different species, and the Galactic Confederacy had offered to provide official recognition and support. That night, as Tommy and HFY sat on the compound's observation deck watching the 3 moons dance across the sky, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. In 6 months, this small human had not only found his place among her people, but had inspired them to reach beyond their traditional boundaries. Do you ever regret saving me? Tommy asked suddenly. The question surprised her. Never. Why would you ask that? Tommy was quiet for a moment, his expression serious beyond his years. Because your life would have been simpler without me. You could have just done your salvage work and lived with your family and not worried about orphan kids from other planets. ZYX considered this. It was true that her life had become infinitely more complicated since that day on Kepler 442b. She had given up her independence, taken on enormous responsibilities, and committed herself to a future she couldn't entirely predict. Simpler, yes, she said finally, but not better. Before I found you, I thought I knew what my life was supposed to be. I thought I had everything figured out. But you showed me something I never realized I was missing. What's that? Purpose, she said simply. Real purpose. Something bigger than just my own survival and success. Tommy nodded, as if this made perfect sense to him. Mama used to say that people weren't meant to live just for themselves. She said the best parts of being alive happened when you helped other people have better lives too. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the alien constellations wheel overhead, neither of them realized that this conversation was being monitored by very interested parties. Tommy's words at the funding meeting had been recorded and transmitted across the galaxy, reaching human space within days. On Earth, in the halls of the Solar Federation government, plans were already being made. The Sanctuary project was important, but Tommy Chin Rodriguez himself was even more valuable. Here was a human child being raised by aliens, serving as a bridge between species, demonstrating humanity's capacity for adaptation and integration. Most importantly, he was proof that humans could inspire other species to expand their thinking, to take risks they would never have considered before. In a complex chess game of galactic politics, Tommy had become a very important piece. But, for now, he was simply a 7-year-old boy sitting with his adoptive mother figure under alien stars, planning how to help other lost children find their way home. The larger implications of his existence would become clear soon enough. The sanctuary construction began the next month, with Tommy involved in every stage of the process. He tested gravity adjusters, sampled different atmospheric mixes, and worked with behavioral specialists to design programs that could help traumatize children from dozens of different species. When the first group of orphans arrived 3 months later, a frightened collection of youngsters from 5 different worlds, Tommy was there to greet them. He spoke to each in their own language, or in the common trade tongue when necessary, explaining the sanctuary's rules and showing them to their quarters. But most importantly, he simply sat with them during those first difficult nights, sharing his own story and listening to theirs. Just as he had predicted, the commonality of loss and hope created bonds that transcended biological differences. The sanctuary quickly became a model for similar facilities across the galaxy. But its true success was measured in smaller victories. In the Andromedan child who stopped having nightmares, in the crystalline being who learned to trust biological species again, in the shy Centauri orphan who discovered a talent for music. Tommy had found his purpose, and in doing so, he had given others the chance to find theirs as well. The small human who had survived the destruction of his world was now helping to build something new, a place where being different wasn't a barrier, but a strength, where lost children could become a family. But across the galaxy, other forces were taking notice of what was happening on Kethmoran. The success of a human child at bridging species differences had implications that went far beyond one sanctuary for orphan children. In the halls of power on dozens of worlds, plans were being made that would test everything Tommy and ZYX had built together. The real test of their bond was still to come. The attack came without warning on a quiet morning when the 3 moons of Kethmoran hung like pale ghosts in the daylight sky. Tommy was in the sanctuary's main classroom, helping a young Zephyrian named Whistle of Wind with her mathematics when the first explosions shook the compound. The crystalline child's natural luminescence flickered with fear as dust rained down from the ceiling. "It's okay," Tommy said, though his own heart was racing. At 9 years old, he had grown tall for a human, his black hair now streaked with the silver that came from prolonged exposure to Kethmoran's unique radiation. 2 years of the sanctuary had taught him how to project calm, even when he felt anything but. Remember the emergency protocols. Move away from the windows. Throughout the complex, alarms were sounding as automated systems detected the incoming threat. Tommy could hear Zethra's voice over the communication system, crisp and professional despite the chaos. All children to designated safe areas. All staff implement Contingency 7 immediately. Contingency 7 meant the sanctuary was under direct attack from an unknown force. It meant the energy shields that protected the compound from Kethmoran's fear storms were now deflecting weapons fire. It meant that someone had decided the most successful interspecies orphanage in the galaxy was a target worth destroying. Tommy guided Whistle of Wind and 3 other younger children toward the reinforced shelter that had been built beneath the main building. Around them, the sanctuary's staff, a mixture of Veltar educators, human specialists, and volunteers from a dozen other species, moved with practiced efficiency to protect their charges. The sanctuary now housed 47 children from 18 different species, ranging in age from 3 to 15 standard years. They came from across the galaxy, survivors of pirate attacks, refugees from border wars, orphans from natural disasters that had claimed entire colonies. Some had been there since the sanctuary opened. Others had arrived just days before. As they reached the shelter entrance, Tommy heard a sound that made his blood freeze, the distinctive whine of Scarven Raider ships. He had heard that sound in his nightmares for years, ever since the attack on Kepler 442b that had killed his parents and destroyed his world. "Tommy, inside now," called Dr. Yeneth, one of the sanctuary's human psychologists. She was herding a group of adolescent refugees, her professional calm barely concealing her own fear. But Tommy hesitated at the shelter entrance. Through the reinforced transparent steel of the corridor windows, he could see shapes moving through the compound's gardens, armored figures carrying weapons, advancing toward the main building with military precision. These weren't just raiders looking for easy plunder. This was an organized assault. "They're not here for salvage," he said to Dr. Yeneth. "They're here for something specific." The doctor grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the shelter. "That's not our concern right now. We need to get everyone to safety." The shelter had been designed to house the entire sanctuary population for weeks if necessary. It had its own life support systems, food supplies, and communication equipment. Most importantly, it had been built to Veltar military specifications. It could withstand everything short of a direct orbital bombardment. As the heavy blast doors sealed behind them, Tommy found himself in a scene that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Nearly 50 children from 18 different worlds huddled together in groups that had nothing to do with species and everything to do with friendship and mutual comfort. The Andromedan twins, whose bodies were composed of living energy, pulsed with gentle light to calm the younger ones. A group of mammalian Centauri adolescents had formed a protective circle around several frightened new arrivals. Zuaixtara appeared through the staff entrance, her 4 arms carrying emergency supplies and her expression grim. She had grown into her role as sanctuary director over the past 2 years, developing an authoritative presence that commanded respect from beings across the galaxy. But Tommy could see the worry in the way her ears twitched, a Veltar stress response he had learned to recognize. "What's happening up there?" asked Kree, one of the older children. The young hegemony warrior was already nearly full-grown despite being only 14, his natural aggression barely contained by the sanctuary's peaceful environment. "Scarven Raiders," the Wythra replied, checking the shelter's defensive systems. "But this isn't a typical raid. They're specifically targeting our facility." "Why would pirates want to attack an orphanage?" asked Sarah Kim, a human girl who had arrived 6 months earlier after her transport was attacked near the Rigel system. Tommy felt a chill of understanding. "They're not here for the sanctuary," he said quietly. "They're here for us, for the children." The shelter fell silent except for the hum of life support systems and the distant sound of weapons fire from above. Tommy's words hung in the air like a toxin, spreading fear and comprehension through the group. "The slave trade," whispered Mordak, an older Klingon boy whose family had died in a border skirmish. "Young ones from different species, already socialized to live together. We'd be valuable to the right buyers." Zyxthara's expression darkened. "That's not going to happen. This facility has defenses, and help is coming." But even as she spoke, the lights flickered. The emergency power kicked in a moment later. But the message was clear. The attackers were systematically disabling the sanctuary systems. Tommy moved to one of the shelter's monitoring stations, his fingers dancing over controls he had learned to operate during countless emergency drills. The external sensors showed dozens of Scarven troops surrounding the compound, while their ships maintained orbit overhead. They had come in force, with enough firepower to overwhelm the sanctuary's defenses. "They know exactly what they're doing," he said, studying the tactical display. "Look at their formation. They're not just attacking randomly. They know our layout, our defensive systems, our evacuation protocols. Dr. Yeneth joined him at the station, her face pale. Someone gave them information about us. Detailed information. The implications were staggering. The sanctuary's location was supposed to be secret, known only to a select group of government officials and funding organizations. If the Scarven had detailed intelligence about the facility, it meant they had a source within one of those organizations. Or worse, it meant this attack had official sanction from someone in power. We need to contact the Veltar Defense Forces, ZYXTHRA said, moving to the communication array. But when she activated the long-range transmitter, only static came through. The attackers were jamming all frequencies. Short-range emergency beacon is still working, reported Kelwyneth, ZYXTHRA's younger sister who served as the sanctuary's head of security. But it'll take hours for anyone to respond, and by then, she didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. By the time help arrived, the children would be gone, scattered across the galaxy's illegal slave markets. Tommy felt a familiar sensation, the same cold fury that had filled him during the attack on Kepler 442b when he had watched his world burn. But he was no longer a frightened 6-year-old hiding in the rubble. He was 9 years old, raised by aliens, educated in the tactics and technologies of a dozen species, and surrounded by friends who depended on him. "There is another option," he said quietly. The adults turned to look at him, and Tommy saw his own determination reflected in the faces of the other children. They had all survived the destruction of their worlds, their families, their previous lives. They understood better than most that sometimes survival required impossible choices. "The old transport tunnels," Tommy continued, "from before the sanctuary was built. They connect to the natural cave system that runs under the mountain." ZYXTHRA's eyes widened. "Those tunnels were sealed decades ago. They're safer than staying here," interrupted Kretich. The young hegemony warrior's combat instincts were fully engaged now. "If we can reach the caves, we can hide until help arrives. It's a 3-kilometer journey through unstable tunnels that haven't been maintained in 20 years, Dr. Yeneth said. With 47 children, some of whom can't breathe the same atmosphere mix. Then, we adapt, said Sarah Kim firmly. We figured out. That's what we do here. Tommy felt a surge of pride at her words. This was what the sanctuary had accomplished. It had created a generation of young beings who refused to accept defeat, who faced impossible odds with creativity and determination rather than despair. The atmosphere of variations won't be a problem for most of us, added Zilneth, one of the Andromedan twins. My sister and I can provide emergency life support for anyone who needs it. I can carry the younger ones, offered Mordak. Klingon physiology is adapted for harsh conditions. One by one, the older children began volunteering their unique abilities to help with the escape. The crystalline Zephyrians could provide light in the dark tunnels. The Centauri children had natural navigation abilities that would help them find their way through the cave system. The human children had the adaptability and problem-solving skills that their species was becoming famous for. ZYXTHRA looked around the shelter at the faces of the children she had helped raise for 2 years. They were scared but determined, young but surprisingly mature. They had already survived the worst thing that could happen to a child, the loss of everything they had known and loved. Now they were facing it again, but this time they weren't alone. All right, she said finally, we'll try for the tunnels. But this has to be organized. We can't afford to lose anyone in the dark. The next hour passed in frantic preparation. The shelter's emergency supplies were distributed among the children according to their abilities. Food concentrates, water purification tablets, medical supplies, portable atmosphere generators for those who needed them. The older children took responsibility for younger ones, creating buddy systems that crossed species lines. Tommy found himself paired with Whistle of Wind, the young Zephyrian he had been tutoring. Her crystalline form was beautiful, but fragile, and she would need help navigating the rough terrain of the tunnel system. Are you scared? She asked in her musical voice as they prepared to leave. Tommy considered lying, then decided she deserved honesty. Yes, but being scared doesn't mean we can't do what we need to do. She pulsed with soft blue light, a Zephyrian expression of understanding. My birth crystal sang to me once that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the song you make when fear tries to silence you. As the group prepared to leave the shelter, Tommy realized that this moment would define them all for the rest of their lives. They were no longer just orphaned children from different worlds. They were something new, a family forged by loss and strengthened by diversity, capable of facing any challenge as long as they stood together. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a maintenance panel that hadn't been opened in years. As they pried it loose, stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of deep earth and forgotten places. One by one, the children of the sanctuary began their journey into darkness, guided by nothing but hope and their determination to survive. Behind them, the sounds of battle grew closer as the Scarvan forces systematically breached the sanctuary's defenses. But ahead of them lay the possibility of safety, and perhaps something even more valuable, the chance to prove that the bonds they had forged were stronger than any force that tried to break them. Tommy was the last to enter the tunnels, taking one final look at the shelter that had protected them. Then he stepped into the darkness, following the soft glow of Whistle-of-Wind's crystalline form as it led their unlikely family toward an uncertain future. Above them, the sanctuary burned. But its true legacy, the children who had learned to see past differences to the commonality of hope, was already moving beyond the reach of those who would destroy it. The real test of everything they had built together was just beginning. The tunnels beneath Kethmoran were a labyrinth of ancient passages carved by geological forces and expanded by long-dead civilizations. For 3 days, the sanctuary children moved through the darkness, guided by Zephyrian light and Centauri instincts, supported by the combined knowledge and abilities of 18 different species. Tommy had lost track of time in the endless darkness, but he could feel the exhaustion weighing on the group. The younger children were struggling despite the help of their older companions. Food and water were running low, and several of the refugees were showing signs of atmospheric distress despite the portable life support systems. "We need to find a way to the surface soon," HFY said during one of their brief rest stops. Her natural Veltar endurance was impressive, but even she was beginning to show the strain of leading nearly 50 beings through treacherous terrain. Tommy nodded, checking on Whistle-of-Wind. The young Zephyrian's crystalline form had dimmed considerably over the past day, a sign that she was depleting her internal energy reserves. Several of the other children were in similar condition, pushed beyond their physical limits by the desperate circumstances. "I can scout ahead," offered Kritich. The hegemony warrior had been invaluable during their journey, using his enhanced strength to clear blocked passages and his natural aggression to maintain discipline during the most difficult moments. "My people are adapted for underground combat. I might be able to find an exit route." But before anyone could respond to his offer, they heard something that changed everything, the distant echo of voices calling in standard galactic common. "Hello, is anyone down there? This is Commander Sarah Okafor of the Solar Federation Navy. If you can hear this, please respond." The children looked at each other with expressions of hope and disbelief. After 3 days of isolation, the idea that someone was actively searching for them seemed almost too good to be true. Tommy cupped his hand around his mouth and called back, "We're here. We're all here." The response came immediately, filled with relief and professional urgency. "Thank God. Hold your position. We're coming to you." What followed was a carefully orchestrated rescue operation that spoke to military planning and advanced technology. Within an hour, Solar Federation troops had located their position and established a secure corridor to the surface. But these weren't just any human soldiers. They were part of an elite unit that specialized in deep infiltration and extraction operations. As Tommy and the others were brought up into the pale light of Kethmoran's dawn, he was shocked by what he saw. The sanctuary compound was completely destroyed, reduced to smoking rubble that still smoldered 3 days after the attack. But surrounding the ruins was an enormous military encampment. Not just Veltar defense forces, but ships and troops from a dozen different species, all working together with unprecedented coordination. The most surprising sight, however, was the cluster of human vessels in orbit above the planet. Tommy had never seen so many Solar Federation ships in one place, and their configuration suggested this wasn't a rescue mission, it was a full military response. Commander Okafor was a compact woman with the bearing of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions under pressure. As she supervised the medical evaluation of the rescued children, Tommy noticed her watching him with particular attention. "Tommy, Chun Rodriguez," she said when the medics had finished with him. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." "You have. Tommy was confused. He was just one of many children who had been rescued. Why would a Solar Federation commander have any specific interest in him? Your story has become quite famous back on Earth, Commander Okafor explained. The human child, raised by aliens, helping to build bridges between species. When we learned about the attack on the sanctuary, the Federation's response was immediate. Tommy looked around at the massive military presence surrounding them. All of this is because of the sanctuary? Partly, the commander said carefully, but also because of what the sanctuary represents, and because of who ordered the attack. Over the next few hours, as the rescued children were processed and prepared for transport to safe locations, Tommy began to understand the true scope of what had happened. The attack on the sanctuary hadn't been the work of simple Scarvan pirates. It had been ordered by a coalition of species who saw the sanctuary's success as a threat to their own interests. Interspecies cooperation makes some people very nervous, explained Dr. Yeneth as they sat in the temporary medical facility. There are governments and organizations across the galaxy that profit from conflict between different species. What you've built here challenges that model. Tommy felt a chill of understanding. They tried to destroy us because we proved different species could work together. They tried to destroy you because you proved that children from different species could see past the prejudices their parents taught them, Commander Okafor said, joining the conversation. That's more dangerous to certain power structures than any weapon. The implications were staggering. The sanctuary hadn't just been a safe place for orphaned children. It had been a proof of concept that threatened the fundamental assumptions that drove galactic politics. By demonstrating that cooperation was not only possible, but natural when beings were raised without prejudice, the children had unknowingly challenged centuries of established thinking. But they failed, Tommy said, looking around at his fellow refugees. Despite everything they had endured, the bonds between the children remained strong. If anything, their shared ordeal had strengthened their commitment to each other. They failed spectacularly, Commander Okafor agreed, because the response to the attack has been unlike anything the galaxy has seen before. She activated a holographic display that showed the current disposition of forces around Keth Moran. Ships from dozens of different species had converged on the system, not as enemies, but as allies united by common purpose. The Solar Federation had provided the coordination and logistics, but the commitment came from across the galaxy. The Veltar government formally requested assistance from the Galactic Confederacy within hours of the attack, the commander explained. But the response went far beyond official channels. When word spread about what had happened here, individual ships and crews began arriving on their own initiative. We've got Andromeda research vessels, Centauri patrol ships, even a Klingon battlecruiser that diverted from a training exercise. Tommy stared at the display in amazement. The force assembled around Keth Moran represented more interspecies cooperation than had been seen since the founding of the Confederacy itself. And it was all because of what had happened to a group of orphan children. What happens now? Asked Alexthra, who had been listening to the conversation with growing wonder. Now, said Commander Okafor, we make sure this never happens again. The Solar Federation has been authorized by Earth Command to take whatever steps are necessary to protect facilities like the Sanctuary. And we're not alone in that commitment. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The children were temporarily housed aboard various ships while plans were made for their future. But rather than being scattered to different worlds as Tommy had feared, the coalition of responding forces had a different idea. We're going to rebuild, announced Ambassador Chun Wei, the Solar Federation's representative to the Galactic Confederacy. Not just the Sanctuary, but a whole network of facilities. And we're going to do it with full military protection and official backing from a dozen species. The announcement was made during a ceremony attended by representatives from across the galaxy. But the most important moment came when Tommy and several of the other older children were asked to speak to the assembled delegates. I don't really understand politics, Tommy said, standing at the podium with his characteristic directness. But I know what it's like to lose everything and have someone help you build something new. That's what the Sanctuary did for all of us. It gave us a chance to be more than just survivors. He looked around at the faces of beings from dozens of different worlds, all listening intently to the words of a 9-year-old human boy. The people who attacked us thought they could make us afraid of each other, he continued. They thought if they hurt us enough, we'd start blaming each other for what happened. But they were wrong. When bad things happen, The differences between species don't matter. What matters is that we take care of each other. The response to his words was immediate and overwhelming. Species that had been suspicious of each other for centuries began discussing cooperation agreements. Military commands that had never worked together started planning joint operations. Research institutions proposed collaborative programs that would have been impossible just weeks earlier. But the most significant development was the decision to create a new type of facility, not just sanctuaries for orphan children, but training centers where young beings from different species would be educated together, learning to see the galaxy through each other's eyes. "You've started something that's going to change everything," Commander Okafor told Tommy as they watched the construction crews beginning work on the new sanctuary. "The old models of species isolation and competition are being replaced by something completely different." Tommy nodded, but his attention was focused on his fellow refugees as they helped plan the new facility. Whistle of Wind was working with human engineers to design atmospheric systems that could accommodate different species requirements. Kree was consulting with Veltar security specialists about defensive measures. Sarah Kim was developing educational programs that would teach young beings about different cultures and worlds. They had all grown during their ordeal, not just physically, but in their understanding of their own capabilities and importance. They were no longer just survivors. They were pioneers, showing the galaxy what was possible when different species chose cooperation over competition. As construction progressed, ships began arriving from across human space. Not military vessels this time, but civilian transports carrying families, teachers, researchers, and volunteers. Word had spread through human colonies about the sanctuary and the children who had inspired a galactic alliance. They were coming to help, to learn, and to be part of something unprecedented in galactic history. "Are you ready for this?" HFY asked Tommy as they watched the latest group of arrivals disembark from their ships. Tommy considered the question seriously. The quiet life he had known for the past 2 years was ending. The new sanctuary would be larger, more complex, watched by the entire galaxy as a test of interspecies cooperation. The children who had once been simply refugees were now symbols of hope and change, carrying responsibilities far beyond their years. "I don't know if anyone could be ready for this," he said finally. "But we don't really have a choice, do we? This is what we are now. This is what the galaxy needs us to be." HFY felt the familiar warmth of pride and affection as she looked at the human boy she had rescued from the ruins of his world. He had grown so much from the frightened child hiding in a storage compartment. But then they all had grown, herself included. Besides, Tommy added with a grin that reminded her why humans were becoming famous for their optimism. How hard could it be? "We're just teaching the galaxy how to be a family." As if summoned by his words, the other children appeared around them. Beings from 18 different worlds, united by loss and strengthened by hope, ready to help build something that had never existed before. Together, they represented the future of galactic civilization. And somewhere in the depths of space, human fleets were already responding to reports of other attacks on innocent populations. The species that had tried to destroy the sanctuary had awakened something they hadn't expected, a humanity that was no longer content to simply protect its own colonies, but was willing to extend that protection to anyone who shared their vision of cooperation and peace. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when humanity decided to return with an armada, not for conquest, but for protection. The age of isolated species competing for resources was ending, replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history, a true alliance based on the simple idea that different didn't mean enemy. It had all started with one alien rescuing one human child. Now it would reshape the galaxy itself. 5 years after the destruction of the original sanctuary, Tommy Chin Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, watching the most diverse fleet in galactic history prepare for what would become known as the Liberation Campaign. At 14, he had grown tall and lean, his frame carrying the natural adaptation that came from life among different gravities and atmospheres. His eyes held the steady calm of someone who had seen both the worst and best that intelligent beings could do to each other. Around him, representatives from 43 different species worked together with an efficiency that would have been impossible just a decade earlier. "The Scarvan Confederation has rejected our final ultimatum," reported Admiral Martinez, the human officer who commanded the joint fleet. They're holding nearly 10,000 children and adolescents from 16 different species across their territory. Tommy nodded grimly. What had begun as a rescue operation 5 years ago had evolved into something much larger. The attack on the sanctuary had been just one incident in a systematic campaign by a certain species to prevent interspecies cooperation. But their actions had achieved exactly the opposite of what they intended. ZYXTHRA is reporting similar situations in the hegemony border regions, said Ambassador Velserith, who had become the Veltar representative to what was now called the Galactic Protection Alliance. Pirates and slavers are specifically targeting mixed populations and cooperative settlements. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. By trying to destroy examples of interspecies cooperation, the hostile factions had created a crisis that demanded unprecedented cooperation to resolve. The galaxy's peaceful species had been forced to work together on a scale never before attempted. Sir, called Lieutenant Kim, Sarah Kim, Tommy's former fellow refugee who had earned admission to the Solar Federation Naval Academy at age 16. Long-range sensors are detecting movement in the Scarven home system. It looks like they're mobilizing their entire fleet. Tommy moved to the tactical display, studying the patterns of ship movement with the trained eye of someone who had spent 5 years learning military strategy from the best commanders in the galaxy. The Sanctuary Network had become much more than just safe houses for orphan children. They were now training centers for a new generation of leaders who thought in terms of galactic rather than species-based solutions. They're not just mobilizing, he said after a moment. They're trying to force a decisive engagement. They want to prove that the alliance is just a temporary arrangement that will collapse under pressure. Admiral Martinez joined him at the display. What do you think, Tommy? You know their psychology better than most of us. It still amazed Tommy that military commanders from dozens of different worlds would ask for his opinion on strategic matters. But his unique background, human adaptability combined with education from multiple species, had given him insights that proved valuable in understanding how different cultures approach conflict. They're not wrong about the alliance being fragile, he said carefully. Most of our member species have never fought together before. We don't have established command structures or unified tactics. If they can break our coordination in a major battle, they might cause enough doubt to fragment the coalition. But, prompted Ambassador Velserith, recognizing the tone that meant Tommy was working through a complex problem. But they're making the same mistake everyone makes about humans. Tommy continued with a slight smile. They think our strength comes from our technology or our military planning. It doesn't. It comes from our refusal to accept defeat when we're protecting something we care about. Around the observation deck, beings from dozens of different worlds nodded in understanding. They had all seen humanity's response to threats against their adopted galactic family. What had started as a rescue mission for one group of children had expanded into a systematic campaign to end the slave trade and protect cooperative settlements throughout the galaxy. The Scarven think this is about territory or resources, Tommy said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him one of the Alliance's most effective diplomatic voices. They don't understand that we're fighting for something completely different. We're fighting for the right of different species to choose cooperation instead of competition. Commander Chunwei, now Admiral Chunwei, and the overall military coordinator for the Protection Alliance, activated the communication system that would address the entire fleet. All ships, this is Alliance Command. Operation Liberation is now active. You have your assignments. Remember, we're not here for conquest. We're here to bring our people home. What followed was the most complex military operation in galactic history. 43 different species, with wildly different technologies, fighting styles, and command structures, coordinated their efforts across a front that spanned dozens of star systems. The challenges were enormous. Translation delays in critical communications, incompatible weapons systems, conflicting tactical doctrines. But they had advantages their enemies hadn't counted on. 5 years of cooperation through the Sanctuary Network had created personal relationships that transcended species lines. Veltar commanders served alongside human admirals they had known since childhood. Andromedan navigators worked with Centauri pilots who had been their classmates. Klingon warriors fought beside Zephyrian engineers who had shared their fears during long nights in underground tunnels. Tommy found himself assigned to the flagship of the main assault force, serving as a cultural liaison and strategic advisor. It was a role that would have been impossible to imagine for a 14-year-old from any other species, but Humans had earned a reputation for producing leaders who could bridge generational and cultural gaps. Scarvan Fleet is moving to intercept us at the Kalos system, reported Kree TH, now a lieutenant in the Hegemony Warrior Corps, but temporarily assigned to Alliance Command. They're bringing everything: battle cruisers, fighter wings, even their fortress ships. Tommy studied the tactical display with growing understanding. They're committing their entire military to one decisive battle. If we win here, their ability to threaten cooperative settlements is broken. If they win, the Alliance fragments, and the galaxy goes back to the old ways, Admiral Martinez finished grimly. Species competing against each other instead of working together. The Battle of Kalos would be remembered as the turning point in galactic civilization, not because of its tactical brilliance or technological innovation, but because of what it revealed about the power of genuine cooperation. The Scarvan fleet was larger and more heavily armed than the Alliance forces. Their ships were designed for conquest, built to intimidate and overwhelm opponents through superior firepower. For the first few hours of the battle, it seemed like their strategy might succeed. Alliance formations were disrupted by the sheer ferocity of the attack, and several ships were forced to withdraw with heavy damage. But then something remarkable happened. As the pressure mounted and coordination began to break down, individual ships began operating not according to their species' traditional tactics, but according to the principles they had learned through the Sanctuary Network. Veltar vessels, traditionally defensive fighters, began providing cover for aggressive human assault ships. Andromedan research vessels used their advanced sensors to coordinate targeting for Klingon battle cruisers. Centauri patrol ships, built for speed and reconnaissance, began serving as mobile command centers for mixed-species squadrons. They're adapting, Tommy said with growing excitement as he watched the tactical display. Look at Squadron 7. That's a Zephyrian commander coordinating attacks by ships from 6 different species. They're not fighting as separate fleets anymore. They're fighting as one fleet with different capabilities. Admiral Martinez was equally amazed. I've never seen anything like this. They're creating new tactical formations in real time, based on the specific capabilities of each ship type. But the most decisive moment came when the Scarvan fleet attempted to break through Alliance lines to attack the humanitarian vessels that were standing by to provide aid to rescued prisoners. As the enemy ships closed on the defenseless transports, the Alliance response was immediate and devastating. Every combat ship in the fleet, regardless of species or original assignment, moved to protect the rescue vessels. The formation that resulted was unlike anything in military history. A defensive matrix that combined the best elements of 43 different tactical traditions, creating a barrier that the Scarvan fleet couldn't penetrate. This is Admiral Korthek of the Scarvan Confederation, came a transmission from the enemy flagship. We demand to know by what authority you interfere in our sovereign territory. Tommy looked at Admiral Martinez, who nodded for him to respond. Taking a deep breath, the 14-year-old human activated the fleet-wide communication system. This is Tommy Chun Rodriguez, speaking for the Galactic Protection Alliance, he said, his young voice carrying clearly across dozens of star systems. We don't recognize your authority to hold children prisoner, regardless of which territory they're in. We're here to take them home. There was a moment of silence from the Scarvan fleet, as if they couldn't quite believe they were being challenged by a human adolescent. Then, Admiral Korthek's voice returned, filled with contempt. You would risk a galactic war for a few thousand primitives? Your alliance will collapse the moment you face real opposition. Tommy felt a familiar cold fury, the same emotion that had filled him during the attack on Kepler 442b and again during the destruction of the Sanctuary. But this time, he wasn't alone and helpless. This time, he had the support of beings from across the galaxy who shared his commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. You're wrong about us, he said calmly. You think we're here because of politics or territory or resources. But we're here because every one of these children matters. Every single one has friends who care about them, teachers who believe in them, chosen family who will never stop looking for them. He paused, looking around at the mixed-species bridge crew who had become his family. You can't understand that because you've never experienced it. You've never learned to see strength in diversity or to find family among beings who don't look like you. That's why you'll lose. The battle that followed vindicated Tommy's words in the most decisive way possible. The Scarvan fleet, fighting as individual ships with competing egos and conflicting objectives, was systematically outmaneuvered by alliance formations that adapted and supported each other in real time. Within 6 hours, the Confederation's military was shattered, and rescue operations were beginning across their territory. But the real victory came in the aftermath, as nearly 10,000 children and adolescents were reunited with their families or brought to sanctuary stations throughout Alliance space. The images of young beings from dozens of different species embracing their rescuers became the defining symbol of the new galactic order. The Galactic Confederacy has voted to formally recognize the Protection Alliance as a permanent peacekeeping organization, Ambassador Chenwei reported during the victory celebration aboard Harmony Station. For the first time in history, we have an interspecies military force dedicated to protecting cooperative settlements and preventing attacks on civilian populations. Tommy nodded, but his attention was focused on something else. A group of recently rescued children who were meeting sanctuary graduates for the first time. He watched as barriers of species and language dissolved in the universal language of shared experience and mutual support. ZYXTRA, he said to his adoptive mother, who had watched the entire campaign with the pride of someone seeing her life's work vindicated on a galactic scale. Remember when you asked me if I ever regretted that you saved me? She smiled, her 4 arms moving in the Veltar gesture of deep affection. You said you didn't. Do you still feel that way? Tommy looked around at the impossible sight of beings from 43 different species celebrating together, united by the simple idea that different didn't mean enemy. Children who had been strangers days before were already forming the bonds that would define their generation. Military officers from traditionally hostile species were planning joint training exercises. Researchers were sharing information that would benefit everyone. I think, he said slowly, that everything that happened, losing my parents, the attack on the sanctuary, even the war, it was all worth it to get to this moment. To see what the galaxy can become when we choose to protect each other instead of competing against each other. ZYXTRA felt tears forming in her large eyes. A human emotional response she had learned from Tommy, who had taught her that showing emotion wasn't weakness, but strength. Your parents will be proud, she said quietly. Your birth parents and all of us who helped raise you. As celebrations continued around them, Tommy reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It had started with one alien rescuing one human child from the ruins of his world. But that simple act of compassion had created ripples that spread across the galaxy, inspiring cooperation where there had been competition, hope where there had been despair, family where there had been strangers. The galaxy was still dangerous. There would always be those who chose conflict over cooperation, who saw difference as threat rather than strength. But now there was also something new, a growing network of beings who had learned to see past the boundaries of species to the commonality of hope and the shared commitment to protect those who needed protection. And at the center of it all was a simple truth that Tommy had learned in the ruins of Kepler 442b and carried with him through every challenge since. Sometimes the greatest strength came not for what you could do alone, but from what you could inspire others to do together. The human child who had been rescued by an alien had grown up to help rescue a galaxy. But, more importantly, he had helped the galaxy learn to rescue itself.